When I declined his block party invite, my neighbor made a fake Facebook with my pics, posted racist memes, got me banned locally, and said should have just shown up. But then I found his fetish Twitter and mailed screenshots to his pastor. With his tithing records, I was sitting outside the boardroom in our Denver office, palms sweating so hard I kept wiping them on my slacks, when the door finally opened and one of the directors leaned out and said, "Come in. Close the door behind you." His voice was flat in that way people use right before something life-changing gets dropped on your head. Inside, every member of the board was staring at a stack of papers, sitting in the middle of the table like it was a loaded weapon. My forged signature was right on top. I recognized it immediately, the loop in the L, the tilt of the last letter. My supervisor, Mark, always tried to copy people's handwriting when he wanted something to look authentic, but he wasn't nearly as good at it as he thought. The audit report was thick. You could almost feel the anger energy radiating off it. The board had already highlighted every section where the metadata proved the document had been created on Mark's laptop, edited under his login, and printed from his office printer. And then the kicker, the clause he had added, the one I supposedly agreed to, was going to cost the company roughly $400,000. They didn't say a word at first. They just waited for me to sit, like they were taking in the sight of me. I could see something shifting behind their eyes, something like recognition, or maybe shame, because 2 weeks ago they all believed Mark when he said, "I don't know how she messed this up. She signed it. I guess some people just can't handle real responsibility." I remember standing in his doorway when he told me that, right after the vendor started threatening legal action. He didn't even look up from his computer. He just sighed, rubbed his forehead, and tossed the contract toward me like it was trash he was tired of holding. When I told him that wasn't my signature, he didn't blink. He didn't flinch. He didn't even pretend to stutter or act confused. He just said, "Well, it's on the contract, so unless you can prove otherwise, it's yours." That sentence stuck in my throat for days. That night, I went home, sat on my bed, and wrote a very quiet, very bland legal request for document access. Nothing emotional, nothing dramatic. Just a procedural ask that nobody would think twice about. Then I pulled every metadata tag, every version history, every embedded print path, every device signature. I organized it all, packaged it cleanly, and removed my name before submitting it as a fraud report through the internal compliance channel. I didn't tell a single person, not even my closest friend at work. I wanted the truth to hit by itself. Now here I was, sitting across from the board as they flipped through the evidence, my hands folded tight enough to leave half-moon marks on my palms. One of the directors finally exhaled. "We received this report anonymously," she said, "but I'm guessing it came from you." I nodded once. Mark wasn't in the room, which was interesting, and suspicious, and honestly terrifying. Another director tapped the forged signature with the back end of his pen. "Do you have anything you want to say before we call him in?" My throat tightened. My heart was pounding so hard I felt it in the back of my teeth. Because I knew something they didn't, something I had not told anyone, something that made this moment even heavier than they realized. I took a breath, looked each of them in the eye, and said, "Before he comes in, you need to know something about that contract." And the entire room went still. I didn't always tense up when someone said the word responsibility. I used to like it. I used to feel proud of it. Before all this, I honestly thought Mark was the kind of supervisor who pushed people because he believed in them. During my first year at the company, he'd tell me things like, "You're sharp. You catch details other people miss," or "I see potential in you." I know now those weren't compliments. They were just ways to figure out how useful I could be to him. The company wasn't some giant corporation. It was a mid-size logistics firm based in Denver, steady and boring in the best possible way. Predictable work, clear processes. People stayed for 10, 15, 20 years. That was the appeal. After 2 chaotic jobs before this one, I wanted stable. I wanted a team that didn't thrive on drama, and for a while, that's what it felt like. Until the expansion project started. That contract, the one he forged, was tied to a new partnership with a supplier out of Phoenix. The whole thing was supposed to be Mark's chance to step into a director role. He kept saying it was the next big chapter. He'd float around the office in this weird, hyper-energized mood, talking about how big opportunities required smart delegation. At first, I thought he was just excited. Later, I realized he was setting up the dominoes. I remember the week before everything blew up. He started acting off. Not loud, not angry, just strangely placid. Detached. Like he was watching things unfold rather than participating. He'd assign things to me verbally, then forget he ever said it. He'd tell me he emailed me something and then insist the missing email must have been my mistake. It wasn't normal confusion. It was rehearsed. And then there was the contract. Truth is, I never saw the real version until everything went sideways. I only saw a draft weeks earlier, a simple agreement, nothing unusual. I flagged one clause that didn't look right, and I remember him shrugging like it was no big deal. "I'll handle the rest," he told me. "Just focus on your own load." That was the last time I touched it. But the way Mark talked about me during that period, it was like he was creating a story he wanted people to believe before the blow landed. He'd make comments in team meetings like, "We all have to double-check our work, some people struggle with that." Or, "I think some of you need to grow into your roles." Always said casually, with that fake mentor voice, while looking straight at me. It was small, strategic, almost invisible if you weren't paying attention. But looking back, it was clear. He was getting the room ready. He was planting doubt so when the forged contract surfaced, everyone would already have the ending pre-written in their heads. I should have seen it sooner. But it's hard to imagine someone would burn down someone else's career over a promotion they weren't even guaranteed. That's the thing about people like Mark. Normal people don't assume someone is planning a betrayal weeks in advance. We assume stress, forgetfulness, disorganization. Not fraud, not signature forgery, not a supervisor calmly setting up an employee to take a financial fall. The day the vendor emailed saying we'd failed to meet the terms and attached the signed contract, I honestly thought it had to be some kind of mix-up. My stomach dropped so hard I had to sit down. When I walked into Mark's office with the document in my hand, he didn't look surprised. Not even mildly confused. He just tapped the signature, leaned back, and said the line that still makes my blood pressure spike. "Well, guess you're not cut out for real responsibility." That sentence didn't just land. It carved something open in me, something sharp, something patient, something that stopped trusting coincidence. That night I made my choice. After Mark dropped that line on me, the office suddenly felt colder, not temperature-wise, just in the way people looked at me, softer, pitying. And pity is worse than anger, because it means they think you failed. By the next morning, rumors were already drifting around the floor in a quiet ripple. Someone from accounting asked if I was doing okay. Someone from HR gave me this knowing smile that made my stomach twist. People started speaking to me in that gentle, careful tone you use with someone who's having a tough time. Mark wasn't saying anything openly. He didn't have to. He'd already done the groundwork. All he needed to do now was sit back and let people draw the conclusions he wanted them to draw. But I kept my face still. I kept quiet. I didn't defend myself. I didn't argue. I didn't ask anyone to believe me. Because I could tell, if I tried to defend myself too loudly, it would make me look guilty. And Mark was counting on that, so I acted like nothing was happening. Inside, though, I was collecting, watching, noting what people said, who aligned with him, who avoided me, who already assumed I was the problem. I started pulling small details together, the kind people don't pay attention to unless they have a reason. Like how the contract was supposedly scanned from my workroom, except the scanner logs showed my card, Bedge never activated it that week. Or how Mark kept mentioning I signed the contract quickly, during a meeting I didn't even attend. These weren't mistakes. These were breadcrumbs he dropped intentionally, trying to make the story feel natural to everyone else. Then the vendor called. It was supposed to be a routine check-in, but the woman sounded irritated. She said something like, "I just want to confirm that you were the one who negotiated this last clause because it's unusual." My heart froze. "What clause?" She read it, word for word. The same added line that ballooned the company's costs by nearly $500,000. I didn't respond. I couldn't. I just stared at my desk while she kept talking. When she hung up, I went straight to the bathroom, locked myself in a stall, and sat there with my hands over my mouth. I wasn't crying. I just needed silence so I could think. Because the pieces were starting to fit together in a way that made the hairs on my arms rise. Mark hadn't made a mistake. He wasn't trying to shift blame last second. He had planned this. He had inserted that expensive clause on purpose. But why? What was the point of creating a financial disaster? Why risk so much? Why forge a signature instead of pushing back through the normal review process? I didn't know yet. But something told me he had a reason, and it wasn't the simple promotion greed people would later assume. It felt colder, more controlled. That night I didn't cry, didn't vent, didn't text anyone. Instead, I made a list, every version of every document I had ever seen. Then I made another list, every time Mark had ever said something that didn't match the paperwork. Then I wrote out every single person who had access to the expansion project folder. When I finished, 3 things stood out. 1. The forged contract version appeared at a weird hour, 2:13 a.m. 2. The print log pointed to Mark's office, not mine. 3. The financial structure of that added clause didn't match any normal vendor pattern. It looked deliberate, engineered. That was the moment I realized. This wasn't just a sloppy attempt to blame me. This was step 2 of something bigger. I just didn't know what step 3 was yet. And that uncertainty, that's what finally pushed me to file the quiet legal request. Because if I was going to protect myself, I needed every hidden detail, metadata, timestamps, document origins. I needed the receipts. And I needed them before Mark made his next move. The day everything snapped into place started out normal. Too normal. Mark was acting unusually upbeat, humming in his office, making small talk with people who usually annoyed him. That should have been my first red flag. Mark only got cheerful when something was going his way. But I was still waiting for the metadata request to come back, still pretending to be oblivious, still playing the quiet, shaken employee he expected me to be. It was around 3 p.m. when I walked by the conference room and saw something that made me freeze. Mark was inside, not with HR, not with our director, but with a guy I didn't recognize. Late 40s, expensive suit, brown leather portfolio, the kind of presence that screams, here to decide someone's future. I stepped back before they could see me and listened through the cracked door. I know that sounds bad, but at that point, trusting the process wasn't an option. The stranger said, "Are you sure she's the one responsible? The clause is extreme." Mark didn't miss a beat. 100%. I tried helping her clean it up quietly, but she panicked. She's been drowning for months. I felt something hot crawl up my throat. Drowning? Months? The man wasn't just burying me, he was building a whole false timeline around it. Then the stranger said something that made the floor tilt under me. "Because if this goes through, the insurance payout will be triggered automatically. And you're positive this ties back to her?" Insurance payout. My heartbeat stopped. This wasn't about my job. This wasn't about a failed project. This wasn't even about blame. This was about money. A huge insurance claim the company would only get if the expansion deal failed due to employee negligence. And I was the designated negligent employee. That clause, the one he added, the one he forged my name onto, wasn't sloppy. It was the trap. A manufactured catastrophic oversight that would tank the partnership on purpose. And the company, thinking it was an accident caused by a single employee, would cash in. But the board didn't know the clause was fake. They didn't know Mark created the failure. They didn't know someone, maybe multiple someones, were planning to blame me for the financial emergency they themselves engineered. I remember leaning against the wall, trying not to hyperventilate. I wasn't just dealing with one corrupt supervisor. I was tangled in a scheme I didn't even know existed. The stranger lowered his voice. "If she pushes back or threatens legal action," Mark cut him off. "She won't. She's terrified. She thinks she messed up. She'll fold." And that's when it hit me. Mark didn't just forge my signature. He designed the entire collapse around it, because he needed a scapegoat young enough, new enough, and naive enough that no one would question it. But then there it was, the universe's timing. My phone buzzed in my pocket. A notification. "Your document access request has been fulfilled. Files available. Every metadata tag, every version history, every digital footprint." I left the hallway before either of them could walk out and see me. My hands were shaking, but my mind had never felt so steady. Because now I finally knew what I was fighting. This wasn't a coworker trying to save his own skin. This was premeditated fraud designed to look like my incompetence. And with the metadata in my hand, I had the first real weapon. I just needed to choose the right moment to use it, and the board meeting was coming sooner than anyone expected. The moment I got home that night, I didn't even take my shoes off. I sat on the floor of my apartment, opened my laptop, and pulled up every file the system had released to me. There were dozens: raw drafts, autosaves, hidden version histories, timestamps that hadn't been scrubbed, even the printer spool logs. Most employees would never know how to find this stuff, let alone read it, but I'd done a grad project years ago on digital forensics. It wasn't glamorous, it wasn't cinematic, it was just meticulous, quiet, methodical, and Mark had no idea I had that skill. I started by pulling the metadata from the forged contract. There it was, the creation timestamp at 2:13 a.m., logged under Mark's credentials. The autosave tracked edits made 3 hours later, again on his device. Then the print record, his office printer, accessed with his passcode. But what made my breath catch was the buried metadata, the kind casual forgers never think about. The clause he added had been copied from another document entirely. A legal template, not ours, not related to the vendor. Probably something he grabbed because he thought no one would ever look deep enough to see the mismatch. I kept scrolling until I found what I didn't even realize I was searching for. An old email Mark had forwarded to his personal address. It contained a risk assessment document for the expansion project, specifically outlining how an insurance payout could only be triggered if the failure was linked to employee negligence. It hit me like a slap. He'd been planning this for months, maybe longer, and the stranger in the conference room, definitely connected. Maybe a consultant, maybe a handler. Maybe someone higher up who didn't want their fingerprints anywhere near this. By midnight, I had built a timeline, clean, chronological, undeniable. When the contract was altered, when the forged signature was added, when he printed it, when he emailed the vendor with the final version, when he started leaving verbal traps around the office, when he began setting up the narrative that I was overwhelmed and sloppy. It was all there. He wasn't just framing me, he was constructing a liability fall guy for a six-figure insurance grab. But here was the thing that changed the tone inside my head. He was arrogant. Arrogant enough to think metadata didn't matter. Arrogant enough to think I would crumble and apologize just to save face. Arrogant enough to think I would never go silent long enough to plan. By 2 a.m., I had decided exactly how this was going to play out. Not with a confrontation, not with tears, not with some dramatic showdown in his office. No. The revenge had to be clean, professional, documented, because people like Mark only understand consequences when they come in the language of systems, processes, and official reports. So I built a packet. Cover sheet, summary, attachments, clear references. I stripped my name from everything except the required identification fields. I cited policy numbers. I cited federal documentation standards. I cross-checked every timestamp with internal logs and vendor communications. Then, at exactly 8:03 the next morning, I submitted it through the fraud and compliance portal, not as a complaint, but as a request for audit escalation. Those are handled differently. Quietly, carefully. They bypass immediate managers. Mark had no idea anything was moving. He thought he'd won. He thought I was cornered and humiliated and slowly unraveling, so I played along. I kept my head down. I avoided eye contact. I let him feel victorious. I let him believe the board would see me as the reckless employee who cost them $400,000. But every day that week, I watched the quiet signs of the audit working its way upward. Requests, encrypted messages, file pulls he couldn't see, and when the board suddenly scheduled the meeting, without him in the loop, he didn't even realize it was because of me. By that point, everything was ready. The truth was a fuse, and the boardroom was waiting to light it. When the board meeting finally got scheduled, I thought the twist had already happened. The forged signature, the insurance scam, the secret consultant. I thought I already understood the full shape of the thing Mark had built around me. I was wrong. I was missing the most dangerous piece. The day before the meeting, something strange happened. It sent out a routine notice that everyone needed to restart their laptops because of a network patch. Nothing unusual. Happens every few months. But when I restarted mine, a new folder appeared on my desktop. A shared folder I had never been given access to before. I opened it, expecting it to be a mistake. But inside was a single file. Quarterly Risk Review Mark Notes Final Docx. My skin prickled. I'd seen the first version of that document months ago, the sanitized one presented to the executive team. But this wasn't that version. This was something else, something raw. Before I could overthink it, I opened the file. At first glance, it looked like normal planning notes until I got halfway down. Then I froze. There, in Mark's writing, were paragraphs outlining potential financial recovery strategies for the company if the expansion partnership failed. But that wasn't the shock. The shock was how detailed it was. He had mapped out employee candidates who could plausibly be blamed. He'd written actual names, notes, weak points. My name was at the top of the list, highlighted, starred. Next to my name he had written, least connected, high performer but insecure, will doubt herself, will not escalate if pressured early. My stomach turned, but it didn't end there. A few lines down, under a section labeled escalation risk, there was another name. A name that made my entire body go cold. SC Sarah, my closest friend at work, next to her name. If primary target resists, redirect narrative toward SC she has access. Fewer records, easier to isolate. My hands shook so badly I had to set the laptop down. He hadn't just been willing to destroy me. He had a backup scapegoat. A second person lined up. Someone who trusted me, someone who would have been blindsided even harder than I was. I closed my eyes and swallowed hard. This wasn't just fraud. This wasn't just insurance manipulation. This was predatory, calculated, pre-planned. Someone in it must have seen the document during a system sweep and, realizing what it meant, quietly dropped it into my permissions. I would never know who, but whoever did it saved both me and Sarah from what Mark had prepared. I stared at the document for a long time, letting the truth sink into my bones. This man wasn't desperate. He wasn't panicking. He wasn't improvising. He was cold. He was systematic. He viewed people as chess pieces, expendable, interchangeable, strategically sacrificable. The forged signature wasn't the betrayal. It was just the execution. The real betrayal happened long before that, in the months where he evaluated our personalities, documented our weaknesses, and calculated exactly how much damage he could inflict on us without raising suspicion. And I knew then, the meeting wouldn't just be about clearing my name. It would be about stopping him. Because if the board didn't see the full picture, if they only saw the forged signature, they'd fire him, but they'd never understand what he really was. And people like him always find a way back in unless someone drags the whole truth into the light. The next morning, when the board called me into the room, I didn't walk in scared. I walked in ready. Because I wasn't just defending myself anymore. I was disarming a predator. When the boardroom door shut behind me, I realized something. They still thought this was about a single forged contract. A reckless supervisor, a bad decision, an isolated incident. They had no idea who they were actually dealing with. The directors sat stiffly, hands folded, the audit report between them like a corpse they didn't want to touch. They asked me to explain what I knew in my own words. That phrase always sounds gentle, but it's really just legal shorthand for we're recording everything you say. I didn't look at the report, I looked at them. You're not just dealing with a forged signature, I said. You're dealing with someone who created a financial failure on purpose. A few directors exchanged glances, confused, skeptical, already reaching for the simplest explanation. Because normal people want simple villains, lazy employees, stressed managers, human error. But Mark wasn't normal. He was something else entirely. I took a slow breath and told them what I had discovered in the risk review file. The list of employee targets, the notes about who could be manipulated, the predicted reactions, the insurance payout plan. As I spoke, I watched their faces shift from confusion to disbelief to a dawning kind of horror. They weren't expecting strategy. They weren't expecting intent. They weren't expecting that Mark, a man they'd promoted twice in 4 years, had been mapping out which employees could be sacrificed for months. But the truth that chilled them the most, the truth I saved for last, was the reason behind it all. Mark wasn't trying to save the company, I said quietly. He was trying to profit off its loss. A director frowned. What do you mean? He bought a personal insurance-linked investment that benefits from corporate claim payouts, I said. He bought it 6 weeks before altering the contract. Their eyes widened. Some leaned forward. One of them cursed under his breath. But I kept going. He also negotiated a side arrangement with the consultant you saw him meeting with. That man wasn't hired by the company, he was hired by Mark. They planned to profit from the triggered insurance claim and the vendor settlement while the company absorbed the official loss. Silence. Deep, cutting silence. Then I told them the part that made my stomach twist the first time I read it. Mark had run scenarios to see how much chaos the company could survive. He didn't just plan to throw me under the bus. He planned to derail an entire expansion project, cost the company hundreds of thousands, and let dozens of employees take the blame in the aftermath if things spiraled. Because the bigger the damage, the bigger the payout. And in the risk review notes, next to a line labeled acceptable collateral, he had actually written, "Organizational loss is manageable if the exit narrative is framed as employee error." The words acceptable collateral echoed through the room. You could see the moment the board realized they hadn't just hired a manipulative supervisor. They had hired a man who was willing to burn the company down one employee at a time if it meant lining his own pockets. A man who studied people the way hunters study prey, quietly, patiently, with the confidence of someone who believes he will never be caught. The director at the head of the table finally spoke, voice low and steady. "Bring him in." And that was the moment, right before Mark walked through the door, right before the last mask fell, that I realized something I hadn't understood until then. The company feared scandal. The board feared liability. But Mark feared irrelevance. He designed every betrayal to make himself indispensable. He created disasters only he could fix. He manufactured crises so the board would turn to him. So they'd see him as the only one who could lead them through the chaos he quietly engineered. He wasn't incompetent. He wasn't desperate. He was addicted to control, cold, calculated, devastating control. And when he walked into the boardroom that day, still smiling like he owned the place, he had no idea that every step he took was leading him straight into the trap he built for everyone else. Mark walked into the boardroom with that same smug half-smile he always used when he thought he'd already won. He nodded at the directors like they were old friends and didn't even look at me at first. Why would he? In his mind, I was already written out of the story. He pulled out a chair and sat down casually. "So," he said, "I'm assuming this is about the vendor issue. I can walk you through the mistakes she made." "Stop talking," one of the directors said. Just like that, 2 words. Mark blinked, confused, irritated. Then slowly he turned toward me, finally noticing I wasn't slumped in defeat. I was sitting upright. Calm, hands clasped, watching him. The director slid the audit report across the table toward him. "We've completed an internal review," she said, "and we need you to explain how your credentials appear in every stage of this document's creation." Mark didn't touch the report. He didn't even glance at it. He just laughed, light, dismissive, patronizing. "I'm sure there's some misunderstanding," he said. "Let me guess, she's trying to blame me now that she's realized how badly she messed up." I stayed silent. That silence made him restless. "Mark," the director said slowly, "we've also reviewed the version history of your risk review document." A pause, a long one. He shifted in his seat. "What document?" The director didn't blink. "The one where you listed employees as viable liability targets. The one where you outlined how the company could benefit from a failed partnership triggered by employee negligence." Something changed in his face then. Not panic. Just calculation. The moment a predator realizes the room isn't reacting the way he expected, he tried to pivot. That file is being taken out of context." "Context?" another director said sharply. "You created a plan to intentionally damage this company for financial gain." Mark's jaw clenched. He finally looked at me, eyes narrowing like I had violated some private rule of his. Like I had stepped outside the role he assigned me. "You did this," he said quietly. "You think you're clever." I didn't answer. I didn't need to. The directors continued. They laid out the metadata, the timestamps, the mismatched clause origins, the insurance-linked investment he purchased, the consultant he secretly hired. They dismantled him piece by piece, calmly and surgically. Mark tried denying, then deflecting, then minimizing, then attacking me again. None of it landed. Every move he made dug him deeper. Finally, one of the directors closed the folder and said, "Mark, your badge access has already been revoked. Security is waiting outside. You're terminated for cause, and the board will be pursuing civil and criminal action." For the first time since I'd known him, Mark froze, not angry, not shouting, just silent. Because he understood the word criminal. He understood for cause. He understood what it meant when a company documented every step of your misconduct with digital forensics. When security walked him out, he didn't look back at me. He didn't have to. I had already taken everything he tried to take from me. The board apologized carefully, formally. They cleared my name within the hour. They brought Sarah in too, and I watched her face go pale when she learned she had been his backup scapegoat. She hugged me in the hallway afterward, tight, shaking. "You saved me," she said. Maybe I did. But the truth is, I just refused to let a man like Mark write my ending. In the following weeks, HR offered me a promotion. A real one, not the kind dangled like bait. I took it, not out of pride, out of steadiness. Out of survival. Out of the need to rebuild what he tried to break. And on my first morning in my new office, I opened my laptop, stared at the empty desk, and let myself breathe for the first time in months. I didn't say it out loud. There was no one there to hear it anyway. But the thought came quiet and certain. Never underestimate the quiet ones. We take notes.